So we call this the scientific method. And usually on your notes, you have like a title slide like this. And then there's some vocabulary like you have at the bottom of the page. Those are words that we're going to be defining later on in our notes, but they're all there and it's sort of in one place so that if you ever are confused about one of those vocab words, you can look up the definition on the front of your packet. So I'm going to skip through those for now because we'll get to them in a minute. All right, so let's talk about this for a minute. So you can flip to the second page. We're going to start with an example. So in this example, a student was studying the effects of red and blue light on plant growth. So to do this, she set up an experiment. And she set it up just like it's just shown in the pictures at the top of the slide. She has two plants, plant 1 and plant 2. So she set it up under all those conditions. And she grew those plants. And at the end of the experiment, plant number 1 grew 10 centimeters. Plant number 2 grew 5 centimeters. So she concluded that plants will grow better under red light. What do you think about her conclusion? Is that a good conclusion based on this experiment and how she set it up? Rihanna?
I would say it wasn't a very good experiment.
How come?
Because she didn't use the same temperature or the same amount of water or the time amount allowed to grow.
Okay, so Rihanna is noticing that when you look at how she set up the experiment, she did have different light, red light on the plant 1, blue light on plant 2, but there were some other things. Plant 1 was at 20 degrees Celsius. Plant 2 was at 15 degrees Celsius. Plant 1 was a lily, plant 2 is a rose. Plant 1 got 2 weeks to grow. Plant 2 had 1 week to grow. They had different amounts of water. So if that's how the experiment was set up, do we know that it's because of the red light that plant 1 is larger?
No.
Could it have been the water? Could it be the temperature? Yeah. Do we know which one it was? No, we can't be sure because of the way she set up this experiment. So how can we improve this experiment and make it better so that our results are clear? Robert?
We could. You know how there's like 2 and 1? We could like add that like and get like 3 probably if we can.
But I want to know, how can she be sure that the red light?
She can probably do it all over again and recheck what she did wrong.
Right, and she would have to change some things. So I want to know, how would she set it up differently?
She would
Let me ask someone else, okay, Robert? Claudia, what do you think?
She would have to, on plant number 2, she would have to change the temperature, the time allowed to grow, and how much water she put in the container and the plant.
Change them how?
Like, she would have to match them up to the same things that she put on the plant.
Okay, good. What should she do about light, Brandon? Should she make that the same?
She should leave the light the same, but make everything else controlled.
Okay.
That should be the only variable.
Yeah, all right, so Brandon used a couple of good words here. So she should control, leave the light different, so red light and blue light. Okay, and like Claudia said, all these other things she should make the same. And what did you call these things, Brandon?
Variables.
Variables. We'll talk about variables tomorrow. We call all these different things in your experiment that you're adjusting, we call those variables. And Brandon said we should control them all so that there's only one thing different. And the one thing that should be different is the amount of light. If we set this experiment up a little differently, so you go ahead and fill this in. And we have red light for plant 1. We have blue light for plant 2. But then we keep everything else the same. As Brandon said, we control all the other variables and make them the same.
We could do that.
about this now. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yes. If she keeps everything the same, but only makes it so that one is under red light and one is under blue light, what if she got the same result? And this plant is 10 centimeters, this plant is 5 centimeters. Then is her conclusion correct? Yes. We say it's valid is the word we usually use, that this is a valid experiment. It means it's a good experiment. It's set up correctly so that her conclusion can be trusted. So yeah, that's a better experiment. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we set up experiments. So when we talk about the scientific method in class, we're going to say that there's 6 steps to it. Now, different scientists might talk about these a little differently, but for our purposes, we're always going to say 6 steps, and you're going to have to know them. You're going to have to know what they are, what they mean, and you have to know them in the right order. So to help you to do that, I have a little sentence, a little picture that might be helpful. So the sentence that will help, if you could remember, people really hate elephants on cars. Or if you look at this picture of Mr. Arcuri standing on the car, then you can remember the steps. People really hate elephants on cars. So can you guess what some of these might stand for? The first letter of each word stands for one of the steps. Sophia, do you have any clue what the P might be? Close, that's a good guess, but that's going to come later on. Jordan?
Prepared.
Not yet, no. Problem. It stands for the problem. And I'll explain what these all mean in just a minute. For now, we're just going to list them. The first step is the problem step. What do you think the R? Any guesses as to the R, Trista?
Research.
Yeah, research. I think a lot of you are going to be able to guess the H here. What does the H stand for? Hi, Jella? Hypothesis, correct. Problem, research, hypothesis. The O. Grace? Yeah, observation. Oh, did I skip E? Sorry. Observation is O. E is experiment. How about the last one, the C? What do you think the C stands for? Eva? Conclusion, good. Problem, research, hypothesis, experiment, observation, and conclusion. Those are our steps of the scientific method that we are going to be using. And a lot of them, I'm sure you know what they mean, but some you might not. So that's the last thing we want to do today, is talk about what each of these steps actually means. I'd like to be in that car. I was scared. Okay. So the problem step. You always start with this in an experiment. And in a problem step, you're asking a question. Question you want to answer by doing this experiment. So, in that experiment with the girl we just talked about in the plant, what was the question you think she was asking? What was the problem step in her experiment? Okay?
Does the color of light matter to a plant?
Yeah, does the color of light affect the growth of plants? That's a question she was asking. So that would be like her first step. The second step before you can really set up an experiment is you have to know some things about what you're studying. And that's where research comes in. Research is sort of gathering up some background knowledge so that you can actually set up your experiment. What kind of information do you think that student would need before she could do that plant experiment? What might she need to know? Robert?
How would she need to know?
Yeah, what would she need to know to do that experiment?
She would need to know like how to do it. Like she would know like what she wouldn't know like what to write for her answer, because if she did the experiment she wouldn't know what to write.
Right, but before the like, how about what would she need to know to set up those plants and to do that experiment?
Um,
Oh, whoa, whoa. All right.
it kind of just
Yeah, I got a little.
Can I just say what it?
Well, what do you think? So for her to grow these plants, what do you need to know to grow plants, Robert?
A
No, not yet. Just to grow some. Say you want to grow a few plants at your house. What would you need to know before you can do that?
you would need to know the steps.
Yeah. How do I grow these plants? Where do I get seeds?
You get seeds from dirt.
Well, you can plant them in soil, right? So you might want to know what type of soil do I need? Where am I going to get these seeds? How much water should I put with these plants? What's the proper temperature that these type of plants need? So I would have to know a whole bunch of little things before I can, set up my experiment for it to actually work. All right, so you get this background information. You have your seeds. You know what conditions you're going to have these plants in. Your next step is your hypothesis. Now, I know you guys want to tell me a hypothesis is an educated guess. We're going to get rid of that. Because a hypothesis is your educated guess about what? When you actually create a hypothesis, what are you making a guess about? About the experiment. You're predicting what is going to happen in your experiment. So before you actually do the experiment, you come up with a hypothesis, what you think might happen. Your educated guess about what's going to happen in the experiment. That's going to be our new definition of hypothesis. We're not going to say educated guess anymore. It's a prediction. So her hypothesis maybe was plants will grow better under red light. So you have your research, you come up with a question, you have your prediction. How are you going to know if your prediction is right or wrong? She predicted they'll grow better under blue light. How's she going to know if that's correct, Jenna?
Do the experiment to see the outcome.
Yeah, she's going to do the experiment. That's the purpose of an experiment, is to test this prediction you made, to test your hypothesis. So you set up your plants or whatever you're using in your experiment so you can test if your prediction is going to be right. As your experiment's going along, what data is she going to be collecting in that plant experiment? What's she measuring? Yeah, how tall the plants are. We call that part the observations. The data she's collecting in her experiment, we call observations. So she's measuring every week or whatever how tall the plants are. And then finally, the last step is she looks at her data that she collected and comes up with a conclusion. And in her conclusion, she decides, okay, here's my data. Was my hypothesis correct or was it not? Was my prediction correct based on the results of my experiment? And those are the steps of the scientific method and what they need.
Do we have homework tonight?
You guys don't have any homework until Thursday probably when we do an experiment. And you have to write a little summary of it. But no.
Oh, yeah.
All right, any questions about any of the steps or what they mean?
No. Can I hit the light?
Not yet. All right. So you guys are the class I recorded today, so